Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here this month. I was unfortunately not here last month. That nasty little virus got a hold of me. But we're recovering from that quite well. I understand we missed a very good meeting. I missed a very good meeting in person. I did get to see it on Zoom, which we're going to do it again tonight. We're Zooming, and it's an amazing opportunity for those who cannot attend to be able to see what we have to offer. Before we get started, though, I just want to say a thank you to the museum. I know that Kent or Kathy are not here to hear it. Hopefully they'll watch this, but it's I thought we had a tech guy here.
There we go.
All right. But the Booth Western Art Guild has been an absolute godsend for me as part of a community of artists, to get to know more and more people, to be able to network together and to learn from each other. And we are very indebted to them in so many ways. And this opportunity to hear wonderful speakers like we're going to hear tonight, Lillian Ansley last month, and the list goes on and on. As a matter of fact, I know we have some more coming up, and I'll skip ahead to that right now. We will, first of all, keep in mind, be moving the first Tuesday meeting to the second Thursday meeting over at the museum. We're going to be moving into the Bergman Theater, which they have their extended hours on Thursday night, so we can have our meeting at the same time the museum's open. And they have a audio video system that's going to make our Zooming that much more proficient.
Do I get to come back?
Would you like to? No, we'll do.
Sounds terrific.
Andy, we're going to do a great job with you tonight, but maybe we can pencil you in for next year as well. But it's going to be a great addition, and it's going to, again, up the game for our art guild to be able to reach out to more people. I cannot imagine those. Did anybody here come up from Atlanta tonight? I cannot imagine y'all doing that with traffic. It's just because I've been retired for 6 years now, and I haven't had to fight the traffic in a work situation. Of course, I could juggle my schedule pretty good back when I was working, but still to have to not the traffic just.
We started at 8 this morning.
I know you must have. I know. Or was that last week? And bless you all for being here tonight. So we will be moving to a Thursday evening, the second Thursday of the month, and over in the museum in the Bergman Theater. We will not be having that. Will start in February. There is no January meeting. As traditionally January and July, we do not have meetings. The February 8th will be the Portrait Society of Atlanta, which, yeah, expand all of our horizons or enhance what's already there. March 14th will be Kathy Anderson. April 11th is a multimedia art board owner, Aida will be here along with some of her materials on the art board that they produce and sell. And all of it just sounds like wonderful meetings coming up. So let's back up a little bit. In December, we have our Christmas celebration time, and we're not going to do a white elephant exchange this year. Instead, we're going to have Susan Patton will be here doing a pet portrait demo. Anybody here done pet portraits? They're fun. They're really fun. So I'm looking forward to that, to see what I can, always looking to see what I can learn. We also have some great door prizes, food, and non-alcoholic beverages. So non-alcoholic. So keep your flask in your back pocket if needed. I'm a Southern boy. I had to throw it in. One thing I'd really like to just emphasize is what fun we had at Westfest. We had a wonderful first annual Quick Paint, Westfest Quick Paint by the Booth Artists Guild. and the results were amazing. And that's not just because first place person is sitting in the back, who did a fantastic job, Kristen back there, Christina. But we had, was it 16 people had registered. Three of them could not make it. And so we had 13 people do paintings and judge them. And we had, that was some fantastic art, absolutely fantastic art that we had. And I know we had Christina Havens took first place, Ed Cahill, a prior member, he took second place. Janet Kaluki took third, and you forgot Janet, who took the honorable mention. Bianca, yeah, wonderful young artist, and she did a horse head it was really great. So the results were wonderful. It was a great turnout. It was a great time, a lot of fun with all the demos, and I took some photos of some individuals. That portrait painting, I've got one in mind, but you know, I just don't want to end up looking like Picasso with my painting. So we'll see where that goes. But tonight we have a very interesting, I suspect a very moving, a wonderful talk in a subject that is, it's part of our lives. And so I'm going to have Maria introduce Andy, because she has more of I mean, I could introduce Bull over here myself, but I'll let Maria do it.
Yeah. Oh. Hey everybody, I'm Maria Valarak, and I'm on the Booth Art Guild leadership team with Jim, Mike, and Palma. And Palma sends her best. She couldn't be here tonight. She threw her back out, but she wanted me to make sure y'all knew that she is still very engaged with the group and leading, and sent the tiramisu in her place. So, what'd you say?
I said she's tuned.
Oh, good,
tuned in.
good. I'm glad to hear that. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Andrew Sheldon, Andy, as he's affectionately known. I met Andy last year when I retired from the corporate world and started plein air painting. I had never done it before. I really hadn't painted a whole lot, but I thought I got to try this plein air painting thing. And Andy and his group welcomed me in. He's one of the founding members of the Virginia Highland Plein Air Painters, if not the founding member, right, Andy? So he's been painting for a long time, and he paints every week down in Piedmont Park or somewhere down Virginia Highlands, somewhere down there. There's a big group of people, and anybody can go anytime. So if you want to try plein air painting, it's a wonderful opportunity in a very friendly environment to go. But I'm here to introduce Andy tonight for a different reason, not necessarily plein air painting. I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read this. Andy, Dr. Andrew Sheldon, paints mainly in oils, but before he was an artist, he was a trial consultant. And before that, he was a psychotherapist and a lawyer. And all of that led him to be involved in the prosecutions of 8 white men for the murders in the 1960s of 10 African Americans. Each murder left deep scars in the survivors, their wives, their children, their brothers and sisters, and their parents. Each murder also scarred their friends and neighbors and the wider community. That's the way the murder of one person reaches into the hearts and souls of many people, and it has a very devastating ripple effect. Think of Sandy Hook or George Floyd or Abraham Lincoln. Andy was recognized by the Congress of Racial Equality for his work in the civil rights murder trials. In 2002, he received the Drum Major for Justice Award from the Women's Auxiliary of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was featured in an ABC Nightline episode entitled Closing the Books. He received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Society of Trial Consultants. a member of the Booth Artists Guild, yay, and the Booth Museum. Andy is honored to be asked to present to the Guild, and we are so honored to have you here, Andy. Thank you so much. Welcome, Andy Sheldon.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, yes. One last thing. Two things. If everyone could please silence their phones, that would be very nice. But also, we are going to be afterward going over to, is it Maine on Coastal? Coastal on Maine. I don't know why I can't get this right. Everyone's welcome. Would love to have you all come. I just need to update the reservations. So by show of hands, if you're interested in continuing the conversation after this, going for a bite to eat, or just having a drink, would you put your hand up so that I can see and get a good count? And then I'm going to duck out real quick. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Anybody else? Okay. I'm just going to give them a call and update the reservation. And thank you, Dr. Andy Sheldon.
Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
Thank you all. It feels very much like home here for me, both because I'm a member of the Booth as well as my wife, but because Cartersville is a place that has a special, is a special place to me. Perhaps you know very well that the recently retired Supreme Court Justice of Georgia, Robert Benham, was African-American from Cartersville, was raised here. And I went to his portrait unveiling 6 months ago, I guess. It was a really well-done portrait. I wish I could remember the artist's name. And he talked a lot about what it was like for him to grow up in Cartersville. So it's nice to be here talking about this topic with you all. This feels very much like the next stop in a hopscotching kind of journey from one career to another career, to yet another career, to painting, and then painting my way through what I think of primarily as PTSD. And you'll have to forgive me, because just as soon as Maria mentioned what she did about the scars, it just was right there. So I would love to say that what I've done here got rid of it all, but that's not what happened at all. It made it more tolerable, and we'll get to that. There have been no straight lines in my journey, and there won't be any straight lines tonight. We'll weave around to various places. One thing I would like to do is to describe where my journey started, and that would be with the cases, and I'll get into a couple of them just briefly. And I would also like to describe for you what the tools may be if you were thinking about doing something like this. If you have a place in your soul that you think could bear some light and would like to go on a journey like this, I will talk about some of the tools that are helpful in that way. And along the way, I would like to show you some of the paintings that are the result of this, and I will read some of the narrative because there have been a couple exhibits, and I had to come up with a narrative for each of the paintings, so I will read some of those for you. So let's get started. Can everybody hear me well enough? Okay. That's
We lost the sound on the Zoom. Can't hear anything.
Okay, can you hear this on Zoom?
Yes.
This one went off. That's why. Testing, testing 1, 2. Can you hear this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the kinds of things that trial consultants do is in the most, Jim mentioned Bull. Bull is a TV show that you may have seen that sort of glamorizes and mythologizes what trial consultants do. And Dr. Bull is the chief trial consultant in the case. Interesting, you probably know this, Jim, if you've ever seen the show. The consultant to the show is Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil started out as a psychologist and then decided he wanted to become a trial consultant. So he started a firm and started doing that. And he was a consultant for Oprah. In her case, when she was sued by the Texas Beef Association, I think it was, for dissing beef. So she hired Dr. Phil. And next thing she did was give him a show, and he gave up trial consulting at that point and got into God knows what it is. At any rate, jury selection is clearly one of the things that people think about first when they think about trial consulting, but that's really the tip of the iceberg. Mostly what we try to do is work with the clients to help them feel less stressed when they go into court, because as everybody in here knows, stress makes it difficult to speak, no matter what it is you want to say. It's difficult if you're so stressed out that you can't remember, you can't recall. So relaxing clients is part of what we do. We try to find ways to tell the client's story in a way that's understandable to a jury, because the first thing I learned was that in law school was that you stand up in front of a jury and you say, this is a negligence case. It's about duty, obligation, breach of duty. And the jury by that time is just going, let me out of here. So it happens that it's easier to tell a jury a story that begins with once upon a time, for example. That's a phrase that automatically locks people into the next part of the story. Those are the kinds of things. But it was as a trial consultant in 1994 that I got a call from the Attorney General of Mississippi to help in a murder case that had been buried for years. The murderer was a man named Byron de la Beckwith. He'd been free since he killed Medgar Evers, and the state was going to try him again, because the first time didn't work at all. The jury was entirely white men. It was selected by a group called the Sovereignty Commission, which was a state agency set up to keep Mississippi white. They handpicked the jury, and so it in no way could be said to be a fair trial. And they asked if I would help, and I was so excited that I really literally shook all over. It was such an historic moment to me, because I knew that Byron de la Beckwith had been running around the country free ever since he'd killed Medgar Evers. So I was very happy to be there. We should go to slide 2 if we can, Mike.
Started here.
That's one. And while we're there, that's this one back here. It is just a painting I did at one point that I call the point of impact. And it's a man that has been lynched and it's his funeral. And so that was at some point in the process, one of the paintings that I did. Number two is, these are the cases. There were 7 cases after the Beckwith case. It's interesting, they talk about these cases by the name of the murderer. They don't say the first case is the Evers case. They say it's the Beckwith case. Second case is the Bowers case. And so the way I would get involved is the first one, the AG called me. The second one, and we got a prosecution in that case. And the chances that we would get a successful verdict, which means that he would be found guilty, were slim to none. Every lawyer knows, particularly criminal lawyers, that you can't try a case that's 20 or 30 or 40 years old and expect to get a verdict. Most of the witnesses have died or forgotten what happened. That's just impossible to do. So by hook or by crook, mostly by hook, we found some old trial testimony hidden away in a basement in the courthouse. Dug it out. There was a trial transcript in there, and we reworked the case from that point. It was difficult because Mrs. Evers was not at all trusting of the situation. It took quite a while for Bobby DeLauder, who was actually the DA that tried the case, to get on her trusted side and to allow him to go ahead. The movie for that case is called Ghosts of Mississippi. Alex Baldwin plays Bobby DeLauder. Whoopi Goldberg plays Mrs. Evers. James, guy that plays Beckwith, he just does an icky job, but I mean, he does it well. And I can't think of his name right off the top. At any rate, these were all killings because of the color of a person's skin. They were killing by shooting, by firebombing, by explosion. 12 people were killed in these 8 situations, and many more injured, men, children, family members. And with each case, I learned about what happened. I met the people that were involved. I met the survivors. And I had a job to do to get the case ready for trial, which involved quite a lot of other work. But in the meantime, I got very close to what happened. And after the first one, I learned that Medgar Evers, who was the NAACP field secretary in Jackson, came home with a box full of T-shirts that he was going to give to his kids. And across the street was Byron de la Beckwith with an old Enfield rifle, nighttime, trained. Excuse me, as he walked to the front door, he shot him from across the street. His kids had just run to the front door, and Dad was slumped on the sidewalk, as well as Mrs. Evers. Merle is her name. And, you know, just learning about that one situation begins to take residence in your soul at some point. The next one, a man named Sam Bowers was the Grand Wizard. What was he called? The Grand Wizard of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Sam Bowers ran free after he orchestrated the firebombing of the Damer House in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, for years. He even testified in Congress at one point. He thought he was just the cat's pajamas. And that's sort of emblematic of how the culture was at the time, that people could do things like this and feel like they were in some way heroes. But I met the family, I met the survivors, I met people who had lived through the murders, and I came to understand some of what it was like to be Black in America in the 60s, but not just in the 60s. and not just in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and Texas. And it began to disturb me.
Back on track, go back on track.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. The question I want to focus on now is why do this? And there were three basic reasons, two of which came with the project, and the third one came afterwards. First one was therapy for me. Basically, I felt like I had to do this. Let me use an image of a house with rooms as the soul. There was a room in my house that I would maybe pass by on the way to the bathroom at 3 o'clock in the morning and not look in, not ever pass by it and never go in there, except to see some forms and some shapes. And so the question was, what was in that room? It was like a room in a cave. And so I needed to go in there and explore. And so the first thing that I did was basically therapy for me. So when I started the project, I really didn't have in mind that I'd be here today doing this. I had in mind that in some way or other, I would fix something in me that needed fixing. The second reason was education. I wanted to discover how I could use this journey to teach other people what I was learning about racial violence. Because along the way, I learned that whereas a lot of people know of instances of racial violence that happened in the last decade, for example, very few people knew that this had been going on in Mississippi for decades, or Alabama and Texas and Duluth, Minnesota for decades. And if you were Black and you lived in America, you lived in this kind of oppressive atmosphere. And a lot of people didn't understand that, but I was learning about it up close. And I thought it was important to bring to other people. Because as I moved through the cases and learned one after another what happened, it became more and more clear to me that it was rampant. I mean, in a minute, I'll show you a PowerPoint that I created that with some help that tried to show how rampant it was in a 5-month period in Mississippi. But we'll get to that. The third goal was art education. And that only developed after it was over and after I'd been in the room in my house and explored it as much as I thought I could. And that's where we are tonight. As artists, we are blessed. We are graced with skills, with knowledge of materials and methods, certainly, but also with more, with sight, with a vision that allows us to see the world, whether a flower or a whole landscape, or a face or a situation in a very special way that allows you to know the world differently, to communicate with reality in a different way than non-artists do, frankly. We get to rub up against beauty and ugliness, and to basically experience what I think of as the sacred, and then to express it, to make it appear on a canvas or in a sculpture. Let's look more closely at two of the cases. This is the second case, the Damer case, we'll call it. Vernon Damer lived in the house that is now a hole over there on the left, outside of Hattiesburg, in a place called the Kelly Settlement. Those may be difficult to see, the men standing over the cavern, but the excavated hole, the blown up, exploded hole. But those are 4 servicemen who are all the sons of Vernon Damer Sr. during the Vietnam War, who were permitted to come home after the explosion. The woman at the top is Ellie Damer, Vernon's wife. When we went back to visit with Ellie about 3 years ago, Miss Ellie, as I know her, is 96 years old there. She stayed on, whereas a lot of Mississippians left after this particular firebombing. She stayed on, and Vernon Sr. had become the voice of voting. He was all about getting African Americans in Forest County to register to vote. And that's why they firebombed his home. 2 carloads of Klansmen came one night and pulled the car up down the road, Monroe Road it's called, and started throwing Molotov cocktails into the house. Vernon had, because he knew sooner or later this was going to happen, had guns in every room in the house. And so Ellie, as you'll hear in a moment, woke up and said, Vernon, I think they've got us now. Vernon jumped out of bed, grabbed the first gun and started shooting back out the window, put that gun down, because he was the only one who was using the guns that night. His son, Dennis, was also in the house. His daughter, Betty, was in the house. He handed Betty out the window, excuse me, and she ran. And then Dennis ran as well. So they escaped, and Ellie escaped as well. Vernon took in so many fumes from the gas and the fire that was in the house that he died an hour later in the hospital. And that's Dennis with Vernon, with his dad in the hospital. And I have, just to give you a sense of the case, recorded, if we can play that now, Dennis, no, it's back one.
Oh, the back one.
Should be right at the bottom of Dennis's picture. Yeah,
There it is. Okay.
I hope you can hear it.
Where things are going.
What was in Canada
There you go.
when they attacked was to kill everybody and burn everything to the ground. The house, store, lumber mills, the barns, cotton pickers, truckers, everything. They had the primary field, loose ground, loose white ground. They could hear cars turning into the driveway late at night. The noise made by cars driving through washed gravel and the opening and closing of car doors is what woke my mother first on the night that we were attacked by the Klan. We then woke my dad shouting, I believe they have got us this time. Dad immediately got up, grabbed his guns, started to return fire. Running through the flames in the burning house, window to door. He emptied over 3 shotguns, loaded with buckshot, at least 1 rifle, more, fired back to a group of at least 8 clubbers. They had him outnumbered that night. We owned a lot of guns and ammunition. Guns were kept at the ready, loaded in every bedroom and in every vehicle we were working or in town. My dad kept a pistol in his pocket, and my older brothers were always when we were receiving a lot of phone calls. These cluckers lost their nerve because they were encountering gunfire from several locations in the house. They thought it was more than one person shooting back at them, but it was only my dad said. In fact, they got so unnerved that they started to shoot at one another. With one of them turned the headlights on in one of their 2 cars. One of their cars was shot up so bad by my dad and prompted them shooting at themselves that they had to abandon it a few miles up Monroe. It's Dennis posted that. Again, that's the older Dennis, the younger Dennis standing by his dad in the hospital. Posted that on Facebook one time, and I read it just before we were going to go back to Hattiesburg to visit, and thought it was such a good description of it that coming from him would be more powerful than just reading on the page. So I asked him to read it, and that's what you see there.
So that's the Damer case. Let's go to one more case, if we could, Mike. This is one that you probably all recognize as the murder of the 4 little girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. I have 2 photographs. The one on the left is of the ladies' restroom in the church, the dressing room where the 5 little girls were getting ready to go up to lead the children's Sunday service that Sunday morning. The explosion went off, and there was a 5th little girl who's back in, you can't tell it now, but she was back in a stall back there, and she was blinded, but she lived, and she's still alive. And those, of course, are the 4 little girls who were killed. The man on the right is Reverend John Cross, who's now deceased, but this is a short piece, and I hope you can hear some of it anyway. This happened in 1963-4.
Well, when you saw that young lady, I take it that at that point, other than the people who might have gotten some minor injuries from some of the debris, there was, at that point, did you know that there had been any serious injuries or deaths at that point?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And was it Mr. Lay who took you over there to where, what in law enforcement terms, we call it the crater where the bomb had been placed, and it was right outside the ladies' lounge?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that. What did you do?
Well, I crawled in, and there was a little hesitancy at first, because they didn't want to follow me in. And I said, well, if y'all don't want to go, I'll go by myself. I left it that way. And then Mr. Lay decided if I had the nerve to go in, they had the nerve to follow me. And we had gone in just about 5 feet before we found the fresh body.
Did you move anything around, or did you just see something?
In order to have to move something around to really see what was in that crater.
When you went in there, Reverend Cross, did you go in there with one of the purposes being to see if there was anybody there?
Oh, yeah. I was quite sure there would be somebody in there. So the timing of the bombing could catch somebody in there.
That was about 10:22 or 10:23, something like that. Well, when you saw that young
Reverend Cross is being interviewed by Doug Jones, who some of you may know as Senator Doug Jones from Alabama. Doug was the prosecutor in both of the church bombing cases. He and I are visiting with Reverend Cross, who at this point lived in Decatur, Georgia, with his wife and daughter Barbara, who was the age of the girls, who was also in the church that day, and who was injured, not severely, but injured enough, and injured as well by the explosion, by what happened to her friends, and lives with that today. And from time to time teaches school children about it. Reverend Cross felt extremely guilty, Barbara told me, about what happened. He had been pastor in this church for 6 months when the explosion went off. He agreed to let the movement use the church as a staging area for the children's movement that was about to happen. When it did happen, before this bombing, there were over 2,500 children who were arrested This is when you see the water hoses and the barking dogs and all of that in the television reels. That was that era. But they arrested so many kids, they couldn't keep them in the jail, and they ended up putting them all in a stadium, local football stadium. At any rate, Reverend Cross felt guilty about letting that happen because he felt like it led to this. So a little depth into a couple of the 8 cases. So that led to the next thing that I wanted to do. That's Denise McNair, picture of her when she was a little bit younger than when she was killed in the explosion. And on the right is a handkerchief that she had that day, as well as a piece of cement that was taken out of her head by the medical examiner. And so that and the shoes that she was wearing on the day were evidence in the trial, and they were put in a black shoebox. And one of my jobs was to take care of that. And so first image that came up for me was this one. And I just sketched it because it had been reappearing for me, you know, for the past 20 years. And I didn't at this point know what I was going to do next. I just knew that now that, you know, people had said, why don't you write a book? And I said, you know, that's the last thing I want to do. But now that I could paint, perhaps, and draw a little, perhaps I could do that. So this is the real beginning of the journey. My willingness to take that on. Let me talk a little bit about the decision to begin. Because I wonder, even today, is it really a decision or more a wish to avoid distress? At any rate, you begin to move forward. You may move very slowly at first because something in you recognizes that something monolithic is going on. It can be frightening, possibly in a way you have never experienced before, and exciting in a way that you have never been excited before. Let me go then to the next painting as I'm kind of fishing around about how to express what's going on and how to get into it a little bit more. This should be slide 8.
Okay.
There it is. I don't have the painting because Senator Jones has it. But it was the first painting after the sketch where I was attempting to find a way to express what I needed to express. This is Mrs. Robertson. She was the mother of one of the 4 little girls. That's Senator Jones. And he and I went to Mrs. Robertson's house and sat on her front porch. She came out. She was very cordial and respectful, but not feeling well. And our job was to see if we could get her to come be a witness in the trial. This would be the second trial, the first one having happened in the early 60s. And it hadn't turned out well. And she really was reluctant to go through it again. It would be entirely too painful. Plus, she was much older at the time and as I said, not feeling well. So we said thank you and went away. And a couple of weeks later, we came back because her testimony was so crucial to the case. And asked her again if she would do it. And she said, no, thank you. So on the first day of the trial, I heard a little commotion and I looked back and here comes Mrs. Robertson in her wheelchair being wheeled in by her grandson. And so I motioned to Doug and I said, you know, and he looked back and he saw her coming. So he went over and welcomed her into the courtroom. So that was the first painting actually that I did. representational, and I knew that Doug would like to have it, so I did put it in a very nice frame and put down here, the heart of the matter. Senator Doug Jones and Mrs. Robertson, State of Alabama versus Thomas Bland in 2001, and took it up to him in DC. And that
What's
was,
the size of that painting, Andrew? It's bigger.
I think it's 12 by 16. So it was still not clear what my direction was going to be. And I was groping and stumbling and still representation. But the journey had begun. And so now the question was, wait a minute, how long is this going to take? How much time do I want to devote to it? Recognizing it is a journey, that it will take time, and no telling how much time. So I said, well, maybe it'll take 5 years. Just guessing. It actually took 2.5. But time is one of the things that, if you're considering doing something like this, will be foremost in your considerations. The second thing was beginning to collect information and to do research. I had collected over the years lots of information, pieces of evidence that nobody needed anymore, lots of editorials, videos, things like that. So I needed to get it all into one place and to begin to sort it out, because I didn't know where I was going to pull my information from in coming up with some of these paintings. This was also the period during which I began to wake up at night. I mean, I know you've all experienced it. For me, it was waking up with an idea, just with some emotion that was bubbling up. I felt like I needed to write it down. So I would do that. I would begin to keep notes. But the predominant feeling that kept coming back was anger. And that anger could take over unless I was basically willing myself to direct it all into the paintings. And so I used the paintings exactly for that. So let me get into packing for the journey. What do you need for the journey? First, I mentioned time. You need time to reflect and to mull over. You need time to paint or make whatever you're going to make. You need time to let it evolve, just like you do any painting, that you do some and that you let it sit and you look at it and you come back and you change it. Same with this. You need time. Secondly, money. How much depends entirely on the shape of your project and the scope of it. And it helps to set some boundaries up front. For example, I decided that I would do a diorama. That would be a terrific way for people to experience some things, just to walk into this circular 360-degree space and then to hear various voices. If you've ever been to the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, they do that. You walk in and all of a sudden these booming voices come from, and it's just earth shaking. The other thing is I started out in my home studio, but at some point I ended up needing to rent a studio, and we'll get to that. But I ended up $10,000 in debt on this journey. So you really don't know where you're going to end up until you get there, I guess. Materials when you're packing for the journey. What will you need to express yourself? You need canvas. You need large or small. My son, the only trained artist in the family, said, "Dad, you need to go big." So most of the paintings are larger than that. And that's why I didn't bring them, because they wouldn't fit in the car. But you ended up with an albatross. I mean, you've got these huge paintings. Where are you going to put them? You know? So that's an issue, small issue, but an issue. Do you want to paint? And do you want to paint a lot or a little? Do you want to use building materials that The diorama, for example, would have required some building materials, and it would have been harder to move than one of those, for sure. So materials is an issue for you. And finally, a journal. I recommend that it's a good place for you to record the important thoughts that come up along the way. And there is an evolution that goes on as you explore the room that you're in. And it's important to record those insights and realizations. So I recommend that when you start out, you start up doing that up front. Another question is, what about your skill as an artist? And I think that's a real interesting question. The basic need is to express yourself artistically, to satisfy yourself and not anyone else. So early in the process, I was really fortunate to have a consultation with a friend who was a playwright. She wrote a play that was eventually made into a movie with Maggie Smith that's called Wit. Again, I'm asking for help from people who I think might be wise in this process. And she had been there. So she said, take a year and don't think about anyone else's opinions of what you're doing, what you're painting. Because if you do that, you'll just stop. You know, you'll get all wrought up about what you should paint and what other people think about it. And I see smiles in the room, knowing smiles. So don't consider what other people will think about your painting. So the second thing is, it's a dilemma. I have competing needs. First, I've got to be true to myself and paint whatever is inside that I need to paint. Second, I want people to know about the personal stories of racial violence as it affected the victims and their families at this point. Just in the way I had to confront the history, I believed it was necessary for others to know about it too. And so I didn't quite know how to resolve this dilemma. And the only thing I could do is let it sit, let it be, live with it, get started, paint, move forward, buy some canvas, see what happens. And so that was the next step. The result of that decision, though, is to learn by doing. Let the process teach you the answer. Don't try to know everything, just get to work. So the first painting after this is this one. This is called An Ordinary Day. This is the painting that points out how little awareness there is of the racially motivated violence that has occurred and continues to take place in our country. It is this lack of awareness on the part of ordinary white Americans that allows such hatred and violence to remain part of the daily experience of Black Americans. So it's basically just an invented month in the calendar with invented entries into different days. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but it says things like pool cleaners here, Billy's birthday, tennis lesson, Dennis, bridge club, things like that, with 3 lynched figures hanging in front of it as a way of expressing what I wanted to express, which was, I thought, a lack of awareness. The next slide, Mike, you're doing great. Thank you very much. Ask the question, how do I express the extent and spread of the violence? I mentioned this earlier. And I couldn't think of any other way to do it than using a PowerPoint. And so what I did was, the next one, was I used a report that I had in my files that was from the 25th anniversary of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. And it had a documented history for 5 months in Mississippi of almost all the violence that they could record in 5 months. So I said, okay, I'll take those and I'll put 4 or 5 on a slide, and I'll do little red circles where they happen, and people can see slide 1 and see what happened on August 3rd, the first one, where it happened. And these would all come out, just be pullouts, and they come out one at a time. And you don't have to watch all 35 slides, but the next slide, Mike, shows what happens at the end. Wow. So to me, turning Mississippi red was as artistic as I needed to get, frankly. And so for me, PowerPoint was a way of expressing the extent of the violence. And each one of those is something horrific, something that you would not want to have happen to you or to anybody you cared about, or to a church, for example, that you would go to. The next slide is about evil. This man is named Edgar Ray Killen. He's no longer with us. Edgar Ray lived in Neshoba County. Neshoba, by the way, means wolf in Choctaw. He's an old forester, timberman, lived in the south part of the county. And he organized a bunch of other of his friends and Klansmen. And nobody, I mean, evil permeates the whole journey. That's all I could see at this point. And this guy represents it to me. 3 months before his trial, he was out chopping down a tree that had caught itself in the crotch of another tree. And when he sawed through the tree that freed it, it came down, hit him right on top of the head, pounded it into the ground, broke both of his legs and his femurs, put him in the hospital, and he was out of the hospital in 3 weeks, back doing his stuff. His lawyers said they wanted a continuance, but he wanted to go ahead. He was all ready. The case that he's involved with is the next slide. And this is an example of painting by Norman Rockwell. I mean, it's not an example, but it's an example of other artists who are doing the same thing, trying to work things out through their art. This is Norman Rockwell. And that's the 3 Freedom Summer workers, including Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, as Rockwell pictured them being shot by, you can see the shadows of the Klansmen. I'm not sure that one of those Klansmen was Killen, Edgar Ray Killen, but I think it probably was. At any rate, that's what he was associated with. The next slide is just to take you into that case a little bit. That's Andy Goodman. His mom, who was a practicing psychotherapist, psychologist in New York City, came to the trial to testify and brought this with her. That picture of her son, Andy, who was killed that night, with a postcard that says, "Dear Mom and Dad, I have arrived safely in Meridian, Mississippi. This is a wonderful town and the weather is fine. I wish you were here. The people in this city are wonderful and our reception was very good. All my love, Andy." Again, just does something to you. We'll go to the next one. So that's my, the best I could do with Edgar Ray. And there, that's the painting right there. Didn't get any larger because I didn't want it to. Edgar Ray was rolled into court one day and he spit at one of the photographers. There were news people all over. He just went, and to me, that's Edgar Ray. The next one is from those three, and I didn't know how to portray this, but what I wanted to portray was the car being driven down that dark Mississippi road, being trailed by carloads full of Klansmen who are coming to get them. So I painted that one first. I thought, what I really want to do is I want to get a windshield. I'll go to the car lot and I'll get a windshield with a rear view mirror in it and a dash, and I'll do that.
Tim's doing.
All the time being pulled to do bigger and more. And I have to kind of bring myself back to the canvas and the frame. So what I did was I painted the first one, and then I don't know whether you can see this or not, but these are out here. So if you're in an exhibit, you come up and you stand in front of that one, and then you come back. And as you come back, you get some sense of who's looking in the window for you. That's a cop because the cops were involved. There was at one point a former Birmingham policeman who was associated with us in the church bombing cases, and he told me that he thought over half of the Birmingham police force was in the Klan. So to the extent that we feel protected by law enforcement, imagine what that would have been like. There was really no protection except to behave in a certain way all the time. The next slide is my attempt to focus outward into the audience. The narrative reads, instead of drawing attention to the victims, the focus is on those who are often overlooked, those who came to watch, and by watching became participants in these horrendous murders, collaborators in the violence. By shifting attention to the audience, I hope to impact emotionally those white viewers of the painting who might otherwise feel detached from some of such events. Who are they, I want people to wonder? Who would attend these murders? The first painting, Faces in the Crowd, is based on the lynching of teenagers Tom Shipp and Abe Smith in Marion, Indiana in 1930. And there is a study that I did prior to doing the large one down here. This one is 4x6. There's a second one that I did later on that's about the audience as well. And by audience, I literally mean audience, because, for example, there was a lynching in Newton. In LaGrange, Georgia, in 1940, where carloads of people came down to the lynching from Atlanta. People took photographs, people made postcards out of the photographs, they would sell them at the next lynching. There is an entire exhibit in a book called Without Sanctuary, where a man collected those postcards and did an exhibit at the King Center. It's now a museum. But I just kept coming back to those people. This is at the burning of this man's body. And
I said, ooh.
yeah. Well, that was a question too. How graphic do I want to get? Because at some point, it's self-defeating. If you ever want people to come and see it, you better hold up on some of the stuff that happened. So.
You might ask a question.
Sure.
So you got to a point where you were saying your goal is to bring awareness to this, to bring awareness to the violence, to bring awareness to the frequency of the violence, to bring awareness of what it is like to be a Black person, especially in a community where majority of the policemen probably are part of something horrible. But is there a next step after that as far as empowerment or when you're saying, you know, like these crowds that are watching? I don't know the exact quote, but the only thing evil needs is for the good people to stand beside and do nothing. But you've been a trial lawyer and you've also seen, you know, where sometimes you can't step in because you just become the next one. So where do you see this going? Where do you see from awareness to what is next?
Can you repeat the question so that people on Zoom hear it too?
I'm not sure I can do it adequately.
Oh, well, from what I gathered, your goal is to bring awareness, but
Yeah.
after awareness, what comes next?
This is next. This is my next step. It's been 4 years or so, and I feel that I'm separate enough from doing this to be able to talk about it to artists as something that the kind of journey that artists might want to take. Not about this topic, but about something that bothers them.
And Andy, when did you work on the cases? How much time was there between working on the case and making the paintings?
Oh, I let it sit for, the last case was in 2007. And I didn't start painting, I didn't do this until 2019.
So this was on your mind for a long time
Yeah.
before you
Well, yeah.
jumped in, and these paintings are recent. They're 4 years old. They're 6 years old.
Mhm.
So it takes time to get through some of this processing of what you've experienced.
Yeah, and the time it took me is not the time it necessarily is going to take anybody else. You know, I thought 5 years and it was 2.5. But then I wasn't sure it was all over. If you look at the flip book, the last page, it said, this is an evolving project. I don't know what's going to happen next. So, yes, sir.
As an artist, I really appreciate what you went through. And it's a very touchy situation. But if you look at even today, if you turn the news on and look at what they did to Jewish people, they're just evil people in the world. And I think it's good to bring it up to show, not to hide. Because it takes a news media, photographers, and it takes artists to show people what's going on in the world. We would not know what the Romans did, the barbarians did, if it wasn't for the artists. Before cameras came along, all you had was artists. And I think it's good for the artists to only show the good and bad, because unfortunately, I think there's a lot of evil in the economy. And it's good to bring up and let people know. So we, you know, there was an old saying which goes on right now with Israel. They say when the Germans came for the Jews, nobody complained. When they came for the Christians, there was nobody to complain to. It's a lesson in history we should always never forget. And same here, because of one race or one color, nobody has the right to eliminate them from being on the earth and taking their life. And I think it's good for everybody to see that, because I think the young people are missing out on this. They're not getting the whole ruthless. Everybody here in this room is living a little bit longer.
Well, I was just reading an article about the fact that the earth is changing, and as artists, we're capturing canyons that may not be there in 50 years. We're capturing streams that may be gone, lakes that may be gone. We're art, and with the way you can modify things now with AI, art may be the only documentation.
Well, as a wildlife artist, what I'm drawing today may be extinct 10 years from now.
Right. So what artists do is important.
Yes.
And you raised the issue of what is the obligation of us as artists?
Yeah, to stand up and tell the truth.
I
Andy?
also would like to say something. This really hits home for me because I moved to Mississippi as a 10-year-old in 19